Hola, W speaking.
It's Jimmy, Mr. President. Did you get my email, sir?
Oh, let's have a look-see. It's Johnny Mushroom Burger, right?
No, sir. It's Jimmy.
No. It's me, George.
No,
George
no,
Woods.
no. I mean, I'm Jimmy.
Well, then who the heck's this Johnny fellow?
I don't know, sir. But did you get my email with the interview invitation for today?
Oh, the one where you want me to defendify religious freedom?
Yes, sir. That's the one.
Well, that's real coincidentally. As you know, I recently converted to Catholicism, just like you, Jimmy.
Well, I didn't do that recently, but okay, go on, sir.
Well, today I'm taking them catechism classes.
I think you mean catechism, Mr. President.
Oh, yeah, right. All I know is it's kind of silly. I mean, I don't even have a cat.
Well, Mr. President, I'm sure that Pope Francis would really appreciate that you're taking the classes.
Well, it's good to get out. It's about time we had one of them lady popes. Anyway, I got to go. Thanks, Jimmy Mushroom Burger. Here, kitty, kitty, kitty.
Well, I guess that's not happening. But on today's show, I am so pleased to have an extraordinary lineup of guests with Judge Ken Starr joining us, author of the brand new book, Religious Liberty in Crisis, which is the theme of today's episode of Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. But first, we will talk with Jack Phillips, that Colorado baker who's been persecuted for his faith in Lakewood, Colorado. He and his attorney will share their insights on what's been going on in that case and some of the broader implications. And also today, we will be joined by Rabbi Jonathan Hausman of Stoughton, Massachusetts. He's the rabbi at a Ahavat Torah congregation in Massachusetts, and also Biff Gore, Pastor Biff Gore at Highline Community Church in Englewood. He was on season 6 of The Voice and is our guy for the theme song, who co-wrote and sang and played guitar for the theme song here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. We've got all that and more coming up on an episode of the show focused entirely on the matter of religious liberty in crisis. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Jimmy at the Crossroads gets started right now.
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. Wow. Thank you, Nathan Matoush, producer extraordinaire. I didn't even get into the full greeting before I already have that round of applause. I am Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner here on a very special and important edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. And it is such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today. Thanks so much for joining us, being a part of the program with Jack Phillips, attorney Ryan Bangert, Judge Ken Starr, Pastor Biff Gore, who was on season 6 of The Voice, got pretty darn far. In fact, he's our theme song. You saw him in the video right there. And Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, all joining us today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads as we dive into a very important topic: religious liberty in crisis. Make no mistake, our constitutionally protected natural rights to practice our religious faith, to exercise our religious faith, have been under attack in this country from all corners. They have come oftentimes, like in the Jack Phillips case, from lawsuits. They have come from cancel culture, where censorship may happen online or in other forms of media. We often now see people shut down from all sorts of platforms in deeply distressing ways, including when it comes to religion. And with COVID-19 and this pandemic, all throughout the country, we have seen Americans prevented from going to church and actually engaging in their fundamental right. And finally, we're starting to turn the corner from that, and there have been some small Supreme Court victories. But make no mistake, we have a long way to go. And religious liberty is indeed in crisis, as Judge Ken Starr's book, Religious Liberty in Crisis, talks all about. Today, we're going to dive into this important issue in great detail with our various guests. And I want to kick things off by welcoming back onto the camera Nathan Matoush, producer extraordinaire, working the Matoush magic. Matoush, you got to give yourself some applause.
Yeah,
I can't be the only one to get the applause. Go ahead. There you go, brother. All right.
You might have to take that button away from me one of these days, Jimmy.
I think so. Might just have to. All right, Nathan. Hey, I wanted to give you a few minutes to share some thoughts, because I know you, like me, we are both Catholic, and we recognize how significant faith is to the lives of so many Americans across the country, and the need for religious liberty. You yourself are about to be embarking soon enough, in a few months, on some missionary work. Tell us your thoughts this morning.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, might as well start off. Yeah, I'm going to be becoming a focused missionary, a Catholic missionary. So I'll be a missionary on a college campus here somewhere in the United States. And as you talk about that, religious freedom here in the United States, that makes it possible for me to practice my faith, to become a missionary, and travel around the country and just make an impact in the Catholic faith. And you mentioned both of us are Catholic, but religious freedom, it's that allows you and I to go to church, not just to go to church without being shot down or stuff like that, like what's happening in other countries, but it gives us the opportunity to go to church without this cancel culture, without the government getting involved. And I think we saw a lot of this, during the pandemic. We saw churches being closed down. And, I can understand, like, the first couple weeks there, we didn't really know what the virus was and things like that. But after a while, you and I, we kind of witnessed a lot in 2020. We kind of thought, like, I don't know if this is really about the pandemic anymore. This is more about closing down the churches, taking away our, religious freedom. Obviously, it's a choice. If you want to go to church, you should be allowed to, even if there's a risk of getting COVID. And we saw, like, what happened in California, where a strip club was considered an essential business, and they had that open during the pandemic, but yet going to church was not allowed. Going to church and singing and going practicing your faith on Sunday was not allowed. We saw that happen in California. Well,
and something else too. While the pandemic policies of government have gotten in the way of people being able to gather at church to exercise their rights to religious liberty together, there's also an important component of being able to live out your faith. It's not just about going to church and worshiping God at church. It's also about actually exercising your faith throughout your life. Like Jack Phillips, for example, in his business, he should be able to follow his conscience and what his faith teaches him as he believes it, especially when he is treating human beings with respect. We'll dive into that in greater depth, of course, with Jack Phillips and Alliance Defending Freedom attorney Ryan Bangert here in just a few minutes. But
absolutely.
But that is an important aspect to this that we don't want to lose sight of. Well, the pandemic is focused on whether or not we're allowed by the government, that it is intruding on our freedoms, whether we're allowed to go to church or not. There are also many more aspects to exercising religious liberty in this country.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well said. And I think, religious freedom is under attack. We saw with the previous administration, the Trump administration, he made big steps for religious freedom. He brought in another Supreme Court justice, a conservative Supreme Court justice.
Brought in three, actually.
Yeah, three of them. But towards the end there, Amy Coney Barrett. And, he was actually the first president to attend a pro-life rally. And we're seeing a lot of that, disappear, unfortunately, with the new administration. It's very sad, Jimmy. Very sad.
Yeah, it is. It is indeed. What Biden is doing is heart-wrenching in so many respects, exacerbating this crisis of religious liberty right now. So let me just ask you, are you optimistic or pessimistic at the start of the show? And then by the end of the show, I'm going to ask you again and find out if you're optimistic or pessimistic after the show.
We'll just have to see. I'm optimistic. I'm looking forward to the show. As far as religious freedom, I don't know what's going to happen with the new administration, but I do know, Jimmy, the light of the right still stands. Our founding fathers created this Constitution. And it's going to be very difficult for them to bring down freedom of religion. I think what they're trying to do is like a 10-year plan. It's going to take a while because they guard, God is guarding this U.S. Constitution, my friend.
Yes, indeed. Well, I do have to say that good on you to bring up the light of the right. I haven't said that phrase, believe it or not. I haven't said that phrase on this show in quite some time. Nathan,
I brought it back today.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. The light of the right will shine on through. Nathan Matoush, producer extraordinaire. We'll check in with you at the end of the show to see where your optimism-pessimism level stands.
Hey, we'll just have to see, Jimmy. That's coming up later.
Thank you. Once again, Nathan Matoush, our producer extraordinaire, working the Matoush magic. In just a moment here, Nathan's getting it ready. We will go to my interview with Ryan Bangert, attorney of Alliance Defending Freedom, and Jack Phillips, who, of course, is the baker in Lakewood, Colorado, who found himself facing several years of lawsuits. This whole saga began in 2012. And here we are today. He just had a trial last month in a different lawsuit. The 2012 case and what happened immediately after that centered on his refusal to bake a gay wedding cake. And then we found Jack Phillips, a few years ago, facing another bit of legal trouble for refusing to bake a gender transition cake. What's his side of the story? What does he make of all this, and where things stand in terms of religious liberty? We'll talk about that and more with Jack Phillips and Ryan Bangert, attorney at Alliance Defending Freedom, in the next segment, followed by Judge Ken Starr, and then two pastors, Pastor Biff Gore and Rabbi Jonathan Hausman will join us. We're just getting started. It's Jimmy at the Crossroads. Don't go anywhere.
Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics.
Are you all right with being a shark maverick? Was it okay to team up with you?
I'm good, man. We're a part. It's a partnership. We're like this, Jimmy. I got you.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense.
Hi, Tom. Gee, you look terrible.
I feel terrible. Achy, fevery, nauseous.
Ooh, that's too bad. You ought to...
Chills, stuffiness, bloating.
Yeah,
Scratchy, gassy, drippy.
I know. Say, Tom, you should try Wearaflu.
Wearaflu?
Wearaflu is the only medication that actually takes your flu symptoms and hides them at various places inside your body so that by the time your body finds them all, your flu is gone. In the meantime, you're back to work.
You were right, Ed. Wearaflu lets me ignore my flu symptoms and gets me back to work. Thanks.
Yeah, and thanks for coming in and infecting the rest of the office.
Come out wherever you are with Wearaflu. Take as directed.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends. Welcome back to our discussion today on religious liberty in crisis, which is the title of our next guest coming up in the next segment's book, Judge Ken Starr, Religious Liberty in Crisis. It fits perfectly for the theme of the day today as we dive into what's happening in this country, in the United States of America, with regards to religious liberty. Right here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. And as always, it is such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today. And it is so valuable as well to be able to have these important conversations about some of the most pressing issues of our time. And this topic and this guest is something that is near and dear to my heart, both because, of course, of the cause of religious liberty, but also because it centers on my home state of Colorado, where I am broadcasting from. You might have heard of the saga of Jack Phillips and Masterpiece Cakeshop going back to 2012, when Masterpiece was requested to bake a gay wedding cake. Jack Phillips, the owner, said, "No, I can't do that. It's against my religious beliefs," starting years of litigation of various kinds, including in 2017, just the very same day that the United States Supreme Court said, you know what, we're going to take up this Masterpiece Cakeshop case against the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, which had found Jack Phillips in violation of the law. The Supreme Court says that we're going to take this case, and then what happens? He's asked to bake a gender transition cake and says, no, I can't do that. That's against my religious beliefs, which then leads to another saga of litigation. So for about 9 years, Jack Phillips has been the subject of litigation, of lawsuits, of so much. And he's the author of a brand new book coming out in just a week entitled The Cost of My Faith: How a Decision in My Cake Shop Took Me to the Supreme Court. And I am so pleased to be joined today by Jack Phillips, and an attorney at the Alliance Defending Freedom, which has been doing yeoman's work from the beginning for Jack Phillips, Ryan Bangert. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. It's an honor to have you both here.
Thank you, Jimmy. Appreciate it.
Thank you both for coming on. So, Jack, I want to start with you first, sir, and with a big picture question, because I've gotten to know you. You and I have had several interviews in the past on the radio. In fact, my radio station, 710 KNUS in Denver, back in 2018, did a live remote in support of your efforts to defend religious liberty for yourself and really for everybody else. Here's a picture of that wonderful day in 2018. It was truly a treat. And so I want to ask you a big picture question that I know the answer to, but I think people really need to hear. When you're looking at running your business and the role that faith plays in your business, as well as your day-to-day life just as an individual and with your family, how does that play out? How is it so important to you that you go about living out your faith? And what is sort of the basic principle that guides you in making decisions with regards to whether or not to do business, a certain kind of business with an individual who may request custom cakes?
Yeah, as a follower of Jesus Christ, that directs every aspect of my life, from the way that I treat my employees, the way that I treat my customers, the cakes that I decide to create. Even in my personal life, the way that I handle my finances, my marriage, raising my kids, it impacts every aspect of my life.
And Jack, to that point, when it comes to every aspect in the business side, you know, a lot of this dealing with this question of religious liberty is, do businesses have the right to exercise their religious faith on a day-to-day basis? How do you look at that from a business standpoint?
I think that any businessman has to stand by the principles that they've adhere to in all aspects of their life, just like I just said. When my wife and I started our cake shop, we sat down and we decided that there were certain cakes that we would create and certain cakes that we couldn't create. And among them would be like cakes that celebrated Halloween, or cakes that denigrated or defamed other people, cakes with alcohol in them, cakes that celebrated marijuana, which way back then wasn't even on the radar. But we had guidelines that we decided that we couldn't step across, and when it came time for these two young men to ask for a cake that celebrated a different view of marriage than my biblical view, we had to decline that cake. But we did tell them, I told them, I'll make you other custom cakes, I'll sell you anything in my shop, you're welcome here, anytime. It's just this cake that I can't create.
Well, and to that point, Jack, and then I'll go to Ryan, I remember interviewing on that day that we did the live remote for 710 KNUS a gay man who said, I've never been turned away. I've been more than welcome to come and do business here, to get delicious cakes, to have custom cakes made. Just there are certain things that I know I can't request of Jack because that would violate his religious beliefs. And I think that's such an important point to hear from someone who's just testifying to your good nature as a human being, as a man of faith, that you're going to treat everybody with respect, serve every customer. It's just certain messages on these custom cakes, as you view yourself an artist, are not appropriate to your faith.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if we're talking about the same gay man, but he also, the one that I'm thinking of, testified in our trial just a few weeks ago and said the same things, that he knows he's welcome in our shop and that there are certain cakes that I can't create for anybody. And we, welcome that testimony.
Ryan Bangert, attorney at Alliance Defending Freedom. Let's go back to 2012 on. I mean, this has been a 9-year saga of various points of litigation. Walk us through some of the key steps in the process to get to this point of a trial that happened just last month on a different matter, which was a gay, or rather a gender transition cake.
Thanks, Jimmy. And this case has been a long time in coming, and I think it just points out the fact that Jack has been relentlessly harassed because of his faith and because of the stand that he's taken. And this case was not about excluding certain individuals because of who they are. This case has always been about Jack's principled refusal not to speak certain messages with which he disagrees because of his faith. And the government should never be permitted to force citizens like Jack Phillips, like others, to speak certain messages that would violate their conscience and their belief. And like you said, this case has been a long time in coming. The plaintiff in this case, Autumn Scardina, made this request of Jack all the way back when his first case was granted certiorari to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. So it's been years and years and years, and Jack has had to live with this harassment for a long time, and it's just unconscionable. It really demonstrates the fact that the justice system is being weaponized by folks who want to engage in cancel culture to ruin people with whom they disagree.
I think it's such an important point, and it's so true. You look at the government, though, and how the government has handled these cases. Ryan, for example, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission was found not to have handled things without religious bigotry. In fact, the Supreme Court, in a decision written by Justice Anthony Kennedy, the Obergefell decision writer, he was the author of the decision that said gay marriage must be legal across the country. He said that religious discrimination was part of what the decision-making process was for the Colorado Civil Rights Commission. Talk to us about that aspect of how the government has mistreated Jack Phillips, Masterpiece Cakeshop, and religious liberty.
Absolutely. The first time through, when Jack was before the commission, it was apparent, it was on the record, several statements being made that Jack's faith was just a cover for discrimination. And you're right, Justice Kennedy said that's unacceptable. It's unacceptable for our government, for decision makers who have the power to ruin a man's life, to view his beliefs and his faith as simply nothing more than cover for discrimination, when in fact, all that Jack is trying to do is serve all people, regardless of who they are. He simply doesn't want to be forced to speak certain messages that directly conflict with his religious belief and to use his God-given artistic talents in ways that his faith says he can't. And so you're right, Justice Kennedy was completely correct when he said this was discrimination of the worst kind, but it was discrimination against a religious believer.
Jack Phillips, you've been at this for, 9 years now, and I can just imagine the extent of the burden that you have been facing, your family, your business, the people who work for you. Talk to us a little bit about that, the challenge of constantly having to face these legal battles and more, personal insults and attacks, maybe just all the negativity, but also what it has taught you about people of faith coming together, unified to say, we need to support religious liberty as a unified front and come together in defense of our fundamental constitutional right.
Yeah, you're right, Jimmy. It has been a long time. And going back to 2012, when the two men came into my shop, within just a couple of weeks, this attorney that's suing me in this go-round had already sent me emails calling me a hypocrite and a bigot, and it also contacted the Colorado Civil Rights Commission telling them that if these two men didn't sue me, that Scardina, the attorney that's suing me, would take up that case. And we've had other requests from other cakes from this attorney, including a cake with Satan smoking a marijuana joint. And in a face-to-face meeting with this attorney, I was told that if this case was thrown out, or for any technicality, or if I won this case, that I would get a call the next day with another cake and we'd start all over again. So that's just the situation that we're facing here. And even if all the people in the country come and support us, which we're grateful that they are, our courts need to be clear that no American should be able to be forced to live and work against their conscience, to be forced to say things that go against their conscience, that the government is supposed to defend those rights.
Ryan Bangert, attorney at Alliance Defending Freedom. This sounds like there's a personal vendetta by Autumn Scardina that goes back to 2012 on, and that there's been a persistent attempt to try and get Jack into a position where he could be vulnerable in some sort of legal context and ultimately try and file some kind of lawsuit, as has been the case.
I think that's a good way of looking at it, Jimmy. In fact, Autumn Scardina, the plaintiff in this case, the plaintiff who requested that Jack bake this gender transition cake, told Jack that the purpose of this entire lawsuit was to, quote, correct the errors of Jack's thinking. It was not about discrimination against Autumn Scardina. It was all about Jack and his freedom and stripping that away. And I think that's just that's the worst reason to bring a lawsuit, to undermine someone's freedom to think, to believe, and to create in a way that's consistent with their religious faith. And yet that is exactly why this suit was brought.
Just a few minutes left with our guest, Jack Phillips, owner of Masterpiece Cakeshop in Lakewood, Colorado, and author of the forthcoming book just about to be released, The Cost of My Faith, and Ryan Bangert, attorney at Alliance Defending Freedom, which has been doing yeoman's work on Jack's behalf and the behalf of many others who are defending their religious liberties across the country. Just a couple final questions for you both, gentlemen. Jack, when you talk about your business at Masterpiece Cakeshop and what you do when you're asked to make a custom cake, it truly is, from your vantage point, I know this from past conversations with you, that you are an artist, and the cakes that you make are absolutely miraculous. They look phenomenal, and it's because you're really pouring a lot of that artistry in there. You are an inspired artist. Talk to us about that and how that fits in with this idea of messages that may go against your beliefs, because to me, that's a fundamental point when you're talking about the idea of making a custom cake and how you then have to be creative and figure out what that message is going to be and how to present it.
Like you said earlier, way back when we first started to open the cake shop, my wife and I sat down and decided which cakes we would do and which cakes we would not, but also created the logo, the name Masterpiece Cakeshop. Masterpiece says art, Cake Shop says cakes, because I wanted this to be a place where you come in and get a specially custom cake. I would sit down and talk with you and figure out if it's a cake for your mom, say, Jimmy, and she likes, has a certain hobby. So we try and figure out what that would be to make this cake a personal statement of your love for your mom, or whatever it is, a remembrance service for someone who's just passed away. It's not just art, it's also communication. It's a message that I'm trying to create from you to whoever the cake is for. So we love to do that and try and make it personal for you.
Ryan, can you speak to the legal aspect of what Jack just described? And also, to me, it's not like Jack has the only cake shop that anybody can go to for a custom cake too. You do have plenty of other locations in Lakewood or throughout the Denver metro area that you could go to as well. And I think that's a point to make too.
That's right, Jimmy. And in fact, Mike Jones, who Jack mentioned earlier, testified at trial that there were other cake shops.
From the radio.
Same guy. He testified at trial that there were other cake shops in the Denver area where he and others could go to get LGBT themed cakes. It wasn't about access. It was all about, as we said earlier, trying to correct the, quote, errors of Jack's thinking. It was a test case, pure and simple. And that's simply not something that I think the law would support, because Jack has a First Amendment right to engage in speech, to exercise his religion, and to create in a way that's consistent with his beliefs. And the Colorado law here should not and cannot be used as a sword to cancel Jack for those beliefs.
And Ryan, this isn't the only case, of course, around the country that's of a similar nature. So very briefly, and I'll be getting into greater depth on this with Judge Ken Starr in the next segment, talk to us about the big picture of what's happening vis-a-vis religious liberty in our country right now.
Well, Jimmy, I think your show's called Jimmy at the Crossroads, and there are, to a certain extent, we are at a crossroads with religious liberty. There are the laws just like the one in Colorado, the anti-discrimination law, are being amended to prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And no one here is arguing that individuals in the LGBT community should be refused service because of who they are, but we are arguing that the government cannot force individuals to speak messages inconsistent with their faith. And we're seeing that with photographers, wedding photographers in places like New York, in Kentucky, where we're currently representing individuals who object to photographing wedding ceremonies that are inconsistent with their religious beliefs. Again, they don't refuse to serve people because of who they are. They simply refuse to speak messages and to communicate in ways that are inconsistent with their beliefs. So this is a problem not just in Colorado, it's a problem all over the country as individuals really try to weaponize the justice system to force cancel culture, to force the issue, really take the offensive against Christians and believers and those people of conscience who simply want to conduct themselves in a manner consistent with their faith.
Jack Phillips, final question for you, sir. What do you want people to take away from your story, especially in the big picture, but even just in terms of what you have faced in your own life and with your business and your family? What do you think people should really take away from this very important saga?
Again, I think every American has the right to live and work freely according to their conscience without fear of punishment from the government. But I also believe that every person should draw a line in the sand like my wife and I did at the beginning and know where that line is and know that I won't go any further. I have to stand by what I believe, and I'm so grateful for ADF to be able to help us through this, because we'd have never been able to do anything without the good help of Alliance Defending Freedom.
And something that I think is worth stressing, the point you raised earlier, Jack, about how you and your wife, when you started Masterpiece Cakeshop, you got together and had a conversation about the kinds of cakes, the standards that you would set. And when you have standards set from the very beginning, that's something that you have to go by throughout the course of your business, and certainly shows, in my standpoint, that from my vantage point, that you were coming at this from a consistent objective of living out your faith in your business. And I think that's something everybody needs to keep in mind. And they should certainly check out your forthcoming book, The Cost of My Faith. Jack Phillips, I will never forget the day of 710 KNUS when we were able to do a live remote in support of you and Alliance Defending Freedom. It was a fundraiser for ADF, especially for your case. It is important work, Ryan, that you are all doing at Alliance Defending Freedom. Thank you both so much for joining us today, for your fights for religious liberty, and Jack, for just continuing to stand by your faith and your principles and what you know is right. I really appreciate that about you, sir.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you.
Once again, Jack Phillips, owner of Masterpiece Cakeshop in Lakewood, Colorado, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, as well as Ryan Bangert, attorney for the Alliance Defending Freedom, which has been defending Jack throughout these ordeals. And make no mistake, these have been ordeals, and they have been really religious persecution. Because, look, like I said, I've been at Masterpiece Cakeshop. I see how he operates. I've interviewed Jack a number of times, as well as ADF attorneys, especially because he's local here in Colorado, and people have just been paying very close attention to this story since 2012, when he first said it's against my religious beliefs to bake a special custom gay wedding cake. And the reason why I say religious persecution is because you can see how he's been treated, how this process has gone from the Colorado state government and the Civil Rights Commission going after him in a discriminatory way that Justice Anthony Kennedy, again, the author of the Obergefell decision of the Supreme Court, saying gay marriage must be allowed across the country, he said this was religious discrimination against Jack Phillips and Masterpiece Cakeshop. And then when it comes to Autumn Scardina, it seems pretty clear what's going on here in terms of back in 2012, starting to go after, make phone calls requesting cakes that Scardina, an attorney, knew Jack Phillips wouldn't be willing to make, and yet kept coming back. And then the day that the Supreme Court takes up the case against the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, Scardina files that complaint, or rather calls in and requests a cake that was going to be denied inevitably, a gender transition cake, and then goes ahead and files a lawsuit, and the whole saga continues. It's absurd, and it's happening all across the country in ways that are deeply heart-wrenching and heartbreaking for any American who believes in liberty and the foundational principles of this country. Jack Phillips would serve any customer for any general reason. But if there is a particular cake, custom cake that an individual would like with a message that goes against his religious beliefs, consistently, Halloween cakes, for example, gay wedding cakes, gender transition cakes, he will say, no, I can't do that. And as we noted before, this gentleman, Mike Jones, who I interviewed on 710 KNUS back in 2018, I guess he testified last month to say, look, I've been served just fine and treated well by Jack, by Masterpiece Cakeshop's crew, by his family. And they've never turned me away because it's not about the person, it's about the message. And when we return here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, we're going to talk with Judge Ken Starr, author of the brand new book, Religious Liberty in Crisis, and discuss some of the macro aspects of this religious liberty fight. We're going to talk about that. We're going to have Judge Starr coming up here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, but I do appreciate Jack Phillips and Ryan Bangert joining us here on the program today. I am Jimmy Sengenberger. We'll be right back coming up with Judge Ken Starr. Jimmy at the Crossroads coming in partnership with the Washington Examiner.
And now, the further future adventures of Starship Winkler. In today's episode, the captain is making travel plans.
Sparks, open up a frequency to price expediosity line.
Yes, Captain.
Hello, and welcome to Price Expediosity Line. How can I help you?
Well, I'll need a room.
Are you traveling alone?
Yes.
Oh, that's a shame. Never found the right woman, huh?
Well, there was this... No, wait, just book me a bed.
King, queen, full, twin, Murphy, or bunk.
King. You never know.
Well, as long as you're convinced. All right, name your price.
Name my price?
That's how it works. Name your price.
$6?
$6 it is. Let's plug it in here. Bippity boppity boo, and sorry, you are outbid.
By how much?
Penny. Someone bid 6. Oh, 1.
Who?
Oh boy, I just booked a room for $6.01.
Well, will the captain ever make a good bed bid? Tune in next time when we hear...
Here's one for $602.
I'll take it.
$1,000.
No! Damn dramatic pauses.
On Starship Winkler.
Hey, this is Frankie.
Hey, and I'm Angelo. We're the owners of F&A Pizzeria. If you're looking for the best pizza in town, remember us, F&A.
Hey, we got the best crust.
F&A.
We got the best cheese.
F&A.
We got the best sauce.
F&A, man.
Put it all together, what do you got?
F&A.
Yeah, you got that right. F&A.
F&A Pizza on the corner of Hell Yeah Avenue and Damn Straight Street.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, on the harmonica, it's Mr. Sang Style, Jimmy Sengenberger.
All right, welcome back. Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Again, the only show host who occasionally will whip out one of his harmonicas, especially when he's got a special guest who, at least so he's told me in the past, has enjoyed my harmonica playing, even giving me the moniker Jimmy the Harmonica Man at one point, as we focus in on the question or the matter of religious liberty in crisis here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm so pleased to welcome Judge Ken Starr, author of the new book, Religious Liberty in Crisis. Judge Starr, my friend, welcome.
Bring it on home, Jimmy. Jimmy the Harmonica Man.
You know I had
Good
to
be
do
with
that.
you. Yeah, of course you did.
Awesome. Well,
But
I appreciate
the government cannot coerce you to do that.
No, they
you did it.
cannot. And they cannot tell me I'm not allowed to play the harmonica either. Thank you very much. So I'm
Well
grateful to have you on, especially as we follow up from Jack Phillips and his attorney, one of his attorneys at Alliance Defending Freedom, Ryan Bangert, on this matter of religious liberty in crisis. It's so poignant, so timely. Your book, I have the advanced copy that I got right here, Religious Liberty in Crisis, Exercising Your Faith in an Age of Uncertainty. Judge Starr, most people, when they think of you, they often think of the Clinton investigation and how you spearheaded his impeachment prosecution. You also went ahead, of course, and were on the floor of the United States Senate during the trial of the first impeachment of former President Donald J. Trump. But you were a Solicitor General for the United States. You were on the Circuit Court of Appeals judge. You have an extensive history as a law professor, of course, president of Baylor University. I would love for you to just tell us a little bit about your background legally and how you find it so important to really talk about religious liberty at this point in time.
Yes, and as we saw during the pandemic, Jimmy, religious liberty is always vulnerable, is always in crisis. But this was a mega crisis. This was a perfect storm of cultural forces and political forces coming together to really intrude quite remarkably in an unprecedented way into a religious freedom, even gathering to worship. But my work on this book began, Jimmy, 40 years ago, not the writing of it, but the living in the stories of religious freedom that said to me when the pandemic came, it's time to put all this together and to spread the good word that while the culture tends to be quite hostile in so many respects to religious faith and the exercise of religious faith, the Supreme Court of the United States has been year after year, in case after case, a friend and a defender of religious liberty, as well as it should be, given the fact that the Constitution of the United States and the first 10 amendments speak powerfully to the idea of freedom of conscience and the exercise of our religious faith. So I hope this book will be a tool, I'm calling it, of transmission for parents and for grandparents to transmit America's culture of freedom, beginning with religious freedom, those first 16 words of the First Amendment. I thought that the pandemic said to the world, religious freedom is quite vulnerable. We need to understand it more fully, more deeply, as a people, as a culture.
Judge Starr, in reading this book and having interviewed you on a number of occasions, spoken off air and several times, having had time in person with one another, I know your voice and I can recognize your voice, and it really does shine through in this book. I have to tell you that as I'm reading it, I could hear Judge Ken Starr, the audiobook going on in my mind. And I have to say that that is such an important thing for a writer. It's not an easy thing. As a writer myself, I know it can be a challenge to really capture your voice, and you do it very well. And I wanted to point that out because when you're passionate about something like religious liberty, like the U.S. Constitution, as you are, it's really important that you make sure you can speak from the heart. So I'd just love for you to speak a little bit to that and sort of your mindset in approaching this book, capturing how you speak and capturing how you think and what you believe.
Well, first of all, I treasure, and thank you for saying what you just did. It's very kind of you. I treasure our constitutional order, our constitutional republic, the very idea that we live in liberty, but it's ordered liberty. We can't do anything we want whenever we want. There is order to social arrangements, and that's the way it should be. And I think what we were also seeing during the pandemic were outbreaks of terrible lawlessness that suggested that we need a return to these first principles that once bound us all together, united us all together, regardless of party and philosophy, faith or lack of faith. And I hope that this book will serve as a clarion call to those who are willing to love America to say, yes, embedded in our Constitution are principles that are sacred to the idea and the ideals of human dignity and human freedom. And so I feel passionately about that subject. I feel as if we have broken down in the transmission process. It's as if the transmission has been falling out culturally, educationally, as so many of our young people seem not to appreciate the culture of freedom that brings people across the border illegally. What are they coming for? Freedom and opportunity. And opportunity is the child of freedom. If you don't have freedom, you're not going to have opportunity. And people are coming here, by the thousands and the hundreds of thousands, and so many more want to come in. How can we therefore, as we hear so often from the political class and the cultural class, this is a defective country with a defective founding? No, it wasn't. It was not a defective founding at all. The principles were there. We had to eradicate slavery, yes. And we must, in fact, always be mindful of the human dignity of each and every person, regardless of race and so forth. But let's honor the country. And this is, in fact, a book, 170 pages, that frankly is a tribute to America and America's culture of freedom. I want to see it transmitted to the rising generation.
It's so profound when you talk about the original sin of slavery that we eradicated. We were the first country in the history of the world to, within 100 years, less than 100 years, eradicate that horrid institution. We don't get credit for that, although, of course, we need to focus on the horrors of slavery. We do need to recognize what the United States achieved. And on Wednesday night, when Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina gave his response to President Biden's address to Congress, he specifically talked about how just because we have this original sin doesn't mean that that's what we're all about. We've evolved beyond that and have fought tooth and nail to improve ourselves as a nation. And whether we're talking about religious liberty or the broader ideals of the Constitution and the American Republic, that's such a critical point that I think dovetails with what you write about regarding the original sin of slavery in your book, Judge Starr.
And it's what Mr. Lincoln called the new birth of freedom. Yes, there was a terrible defect, and it was called slavery. But then, well over a century ago, we addressed that issue. Of course, we didn't solve the issue of racism in society, but the idea that this is somehow a racist society is, to me, so profoundly unfair because, of course, there are going to be bad people in any society, even in America. And so let's set our faces against that, but let's not condemn the very structure of our government. It was Frederick Douglass who had lived in slavery, so he spoke from authority, who spoke eloquently of what he called the genius of America's institutions. Let's celebrate the genius of America's institutions, especially since here in the 21st century, we enjoy the flowers of freedom that have been passed down to us from the founding to this very era. And let's now understand this culture of freedom. Let's don't just rah-rah. Let's understand the principles that undergird ultimately American democracy. And I fear that there is a lack of understanding and at times a lack of sympathy. I'll be very specific. The 1619 Project, trumpeted and championed by the New York Times, has a very different worldview of who we are as Americans and what our background is. And yet, what I do know, this is a fact, not opinion, is that in the very first Congress of the United States, the Congress set its face against the expansion of slavery into what was called the Northwest Territory. And it was widely supported. So even though slavery existed in the South, here people came together, I think, to recognize its inherent evil and to say, we're just not going to extend it. This was 1789. So the very first Congress of the United States was setting its face against the expansion of slavery, and the Constitution itself set its face against the permanency of the evil, the abhorrent slave trade. So let's give some credit to the founding generation, to a generation of genius, just as Frederick Douglass recognized.
I think that's so profound. And I think it's important. Well, actually, I really love that you brought up Frederick Douglass because I often reference him, whether it's in the context of the 1619 Project or what we've been seeing with regards to Black Lives Matter, the list goes on, where in his speech, What to the Slave is the 4th of July from, I think, 1854, he called the Constitution, in all caps, a glorious liberty document. And he said that the principles of the Declaration of Independence are, quote, saving principles. And what he said is that the United States was not living up to those principles that were enshrined in our nation's founding documents. A resounding and very pointed and appropriate condemnation, to be sure. When it comes to America's founding principles, one of the chief principles was this idea of religious liberty. Can you expand upon that notion of where the founding fathers, what the founding fathers viewed about religious liberty, and where we are today in your assessment in terms of religious liberty being, as your book title says, in crisis?
Yes, thank you. The same first Congress that passed the First Amendment and sent it on to the states for debate and ratification, that very same Congress, during that very same year, passed a very important statute. We just mentioned it. The Northwest Ordinance not only forbade slavery in what is now Ohio and Indiana, essentially the Midwest, but it also lifted up the value of religious belief and practice. And these are the words of the Northwest Ordinance, passed by Congress, signed into law by General Washington. Religion, morality necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind. Schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. And so one of the things that I wanted to do, mindful of these founding principles, is to examine our constitutional order and to say, what does that mean in practice? Here's an example. It means freedom of conscience. You have had on your program Jack Phillips. Historically, America has been willing to create exceptions based on religious faith and belief and practice to generally applicable laws. And guess what? The Supreme Court of the United States has overwhelmingly upheld those kinds of ameliorative measures, decisions by the courts to say, we don't all have to march to the beat of the same drummer. A favorite example, which I emphasize in the book, is the Supreme Court's decision in a case that came out of Wisconsin involving the Amish community. And the Supreme Court vindicated the right of the Amish community to say, after the 8th grade, we want our children to come back into our community full time and to learn trades and so forth. That was challenged by the state of Wisconsin, who wanted all children to stay in the public schools until they had reached their 16th birthday, a perfectly reasonable law. But the court created an exception based upon free exercise and the ability of these Amish families to maintain their way of life in a pluralistic society. That attitude of benign of encouragement of communities to live their own lives consistent with their faith is now under assault. So to bring it home, and I think Jack Phillips embodies that, you must march to the beat of one particular drummer, and you cannot step out of line, because if you do, in that case, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission is going to come after you. Well, the Supreme Court of the United States, 7-2, so not one of those 5-4 squeakers, spoke very eloquently through the voice of Justice Anthony Kennedy to the effect that the Colorado Commission had evinced, or several of its members had evinced actual hostility to religion, which is utterly inconsistent with the Constitution. Well, this makes my point. The culture, and frequently elected officials and appointed officials, are hostile, not just neutral, but hostile to religious belief and practice. And the Supreme Court says time and again, hands off, leave them alone, let them live their lives as individuals and in faith communities.
And I noted this in my interview with Jack Phillips and attorney Ryan Bangert, but Justice Kennedy also wrote the Obergefell decision, and I think that is a notable point to raise when we're talking about how he authored the rebuke 7-2 of the Colorado Civil Rights Commission. Again, we're talking with Judge Ken Starr, author of the new book, Religious Liberty in Crisis, Exercising Your Faith in an Age of Uncertainty. And I want to go to the final chapter here before the afterword, The Rise of Cancel Culture. And you say this, Judge Starr: the sentiment behind the increasingly venomous attack on faith is not hard to discern. We call it the harm principle. That is, in the view of millions of American secularists, religion is now a bad thing. Their reasoning: religious beliefs and practices inflict harm on individuals. Please talk to us about this harm principle and the role that it plays in this fight to defend religious liberty right now.
It's a very powerful movement in the culture. By virtue of, and let's stay with Jack, by virtue of Jack Phillips being willing, graciously, kindly, he's a lovely man, to serve anyone and everyone, regardless of sexual orientation, marital status. He loves everyone. That's part of his faith vision. But he could not perform certain specific acts, such as celebrating a non-traditional marriage, as a matter of religious belief and practice. And this is a religious belief grounded in ancient religious faith, the three Abrahamic faiths. The majority of people in the world adhere to one of these traditions. And so Jack Phillips says, I will serve you, but I can't perform this artistry and perform what you want me to do, which is to celebrate a non-traditional wedding. The theory is you have inflicted harm, Jack, on the two of us and perhaps others indirectly because of your refusal to celebrate with us in this particular way. I believe that that application of you're harming me, and the law tries to protect us all from harm from others, the civil law and the criminal laws. But I don't think that that's a harm that outweighs, and I recognize that people will take offense at that, but I don't think that that taking offense outweighs in our constitutional order the ability of individuals to lead their own lives and to pursue their own vision of what they're called upon as Christians or Orthodox Jews or Muslims to live their lives. And so we're now at a, I think, watershed point embodied in the pending in Congress Equality Act. Equality sounds so wonderful, and it is, as long as it's not equality that's forced by the government without any exceptions whatsoever. And what our tradition has always held, and the Supreme Court has been steadfast in protecting this tradition, is that there are exceptions to these equality-driven laws. I mentioned the Wisconsin educational system. That was equality. Everybody has to go to school until he or she reaches his or her 16th birthday. Well, the Supreme Court of the United States said we've got to take into account and accommodate the conscience of those who have a different kind of view. That's what we need to recapture. But here's the news. If government comes after a community of faith or an individual of faith, the Supreme Court of the United States has been there time and time again over these recent decades to protect the individual against the coercive arm of the government.
As we wrap up here with you, Judge Ken Starr, I want to ask you about the optimism that you seem to have in this book, because as you say in the title, religious liberty is indeed in crisis right now. Jack Phillips is but one of many examples, and you've cited a couple of others today, of the assault on religious liberty of individuals, of businesses, and so forth. Yet you do strike some bit of optimism in your book, especially about the United States Supreme Court. What keeps you optimistic about religious liberty in this country, especially as we move forward through this crisis?
The culture has shifted to a very hostile attitude toward religious belief and practice, mocking religious belief and practice. And yet we look to the Supreme Court from whence our help comes, because time and again, the Supreme Court is actually unanimous in vindicating the claims of religious liberty. You mentioned Alliance Defending Freedom. They have won their last 8 cases in the Supreme Court. That's a pretty good one-loss record, namely a perfect record of 8-0 since they've really been focusing on Supreme Court practice. And there are other friends of liberty out there, and that's the other part of the good news. First Liberty of Dallas, the Beckett Fund. There are a number of wonderful pro-freedom organizations that are active and energetic, that merit our support and our prayers. And they are doing a fantastic job in fighting against, in law, peacefully, these cultural movements that then find themselves into coercive measures that would obliterate acts of conscience. One very quick example, a Christian school. Unanimous Supreme Court vindicating the right of the Christian school in the face of the Obama administration's EEOC and Justice Department effort to constrain their ability to control who it is who's going to teach and the like. 9-0, including Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was, in many respects, a strong friend of freedom. That's how powerful the freedom principles are. They can unite left and right on the Supreme Court. I hope and pray they can begin reuniting left and right politically. Let us find ways that we can live together with our deep differences.
Judge Ken Starr, I so appreciate your time today. I hope we can talk about this in greater depth for the Jimmy at the Crossroads podcast separately, and I will have a piece in the Examiner, I expect this week, that will kind of dive in more into your book and reviewing Religious Liberty in Crisis. I have it right here. I strongly encourage everybody to take a look at it and get a copy, because we are facing a seminal moment in our history when it comes to religious liberty, Judge Starr, and we need to be talking about this. And what I love is that you're approaching it in a scholarly way, because you are a scholar. You are someone who's been on the bench serving as a circuit court judge. You are someone who has been all about the Constitution throughout your life, but you talk about it in an approachable way, which I think is critical, because you can get lost in the weeds of these kinds of things all the time. It's pretty easy.
Well, I'd hoped, Jimmy, and thank you again for those kind words, that this would be not simply accessible, but it would be readily understandable by high school students. I want homeschoolers, I want parents of high school students, college students. I want the greatest generation, those who remain, but especially the baby boomers, us grandparents now, and then our children, the children of those who are in the educational system now, to rally behind America's culture of freedom. And I hope that this book will serve as a very accessible, easy to read tool to help us inform ourselves, re-educate ourselves about our precious culture of freedom.
Well, it certainly is approachable, I think, for people of every generation, just about, Judge Ken Starr. So I appreciate it. And I do have to serenade you as you go. Judge Judge Ken Starr,
Sounded
everybody.
good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Once again, Judge Ken Starr joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Somehow I always tend to go a little longer with him than I anticipate, but he's got a lot to say, and we have a lot to learn from him. Again, check out his book. I have it here, Religious Liberty in Crisis. It is a great read, worthy of checking out, taking a look at, reading through and through. It's not long, and it's a pretty fast read. I'll have a column on it this week in the Washington Examiner on this very topic of religious liberty, so keep tabs on that. We have to take a break and get back to our panel, get onto our panel of clergymen joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads to give their thoughts on where religious liberty is at right now as pastors and where we go from here. We've got that and more coming up on this very special Religious Liberty in Crisis edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Don't go anywhere.
Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics.
Are you all right with being a shark maverick? Was it okay to team up with you?
I'm good, man. It's a partnership. We're like this, Jimmy. I got you.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense.
So these are the auditions for guest host of my new show, Jimmy at the Crossroads. Please step up and state your name.
Hi, I'm Dr. Phil. You know, every pancake has two sides, and we're going to get to the other side of that pancake when we come back from the break.
Mr. Shatner.
Bernie Sanders will probably be the Democratic nominee.
You're going to have to talk faster.
I was going at full speed.
Kelsey Grammer.
Very well. I'll send you all to heaven before condemning you to hell. My little snowy flake, poor little snowy flake, triggered in every way.
President Bill Clinton, whenever you're ready.
Hey, how y'all doing? So, how about we play a little game of the old switcheroo?
Thank you.
Hey, if I get the gig, do I get an intern?
Thank you.
Just asking.
Tom Hanks, go ahead, please.
I am Tom Hanks at your service.
Can you try an announcer voice, sir?
Oh, an announcer voice. Oh, come on. I got a lot of movies to do. Okay, I'll do an announcer voice. I am an announcer. I'm the announcer. Ha! How was that? The announcer guy. Ha!
I think we're going to have to do another audition call, guys.
Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. I got Jimmy at the crossroads.
And ladies and gentlemen, it's now time for the Crossroads panel with Jimmy Sengenberger and special guest, Pastor Biff Gore, and later on, Rabbi Jonathan Hausman. Here's your host, Jimmy Sengenberger.
Thank you, Mr. Matoush. Working the Matoush magic. It's Nathan, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us, being a part of the program. What informative, insightful interviews from Jack Phillips and his attorney, Ryan Bangert, and Judge Ken Starr. You can't help but feel for Jack Phillips and all that he has gone through in Lakewood, Colorado, when, again, this is a man who said, I can't bake a gay wedding cake or I can't bake a gender transition cake because the message goes against my religious beliefs. If you, as a gay man or as a trans person, want to come request a cake, I'm happy to bake it for you, but not if it has a message that violates my religious faith. I won't even bake, he says, a Halloween cake, for example. Yet that's not enough for the left. And what they've been trying to do here in this country, in the United States of America, in terms of cancel culture, in terms of silencing religious belief, and really bringing about this crisis of religious liberty. But Judge Ken Starr was pretty optimistic based on Supreme Court precedent, recent decisions. He's looking at this from the vantage point of, you know what, the Supreme Court's actually going to be a stalwart for our religious liberty. His optimism, you can't help but feel a little bit like Judge Starr's optimism, whenever he's optimistic, is infectious. At least I certainly can't. So that's an encouraging thing. But what is the current state of religious liberty in America today? Every day when we do a show and you see the very beginning of the program, that live stream intro song that features someone by the name of Biff Gore, the ambassador of soul, as they call him. He was on season 6 of The Voice. He is a pastor, associate pastor at Highline Community Church in Englewood, Colorado, and he joins us now for the first time as a guest, although we've played him so many times already here on this program. Pastor Biff Gore, welcome, my friend. It's good to talk with you.
So good to talk with you as well, Jimmy. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm honored to be here and talk about things that are near and dear to my heart and should be near and dear to the country, for the country.
There we go. I was waiting for Nathan's applause for you, Biff. Finally, it's about time, Nathan. You were a little slow on the uptake on that one, and we will be joined in a little while by Rabbi Jonathan Hausman via the telephone. He has a clerical obligation that he's got to wrap up with first. But Biff, let me ask you first, before we dive into the meat and potatoes of this religious liberty discussion, how have things been for you from the pastoral side, from your church, Highline Community Church, amidst the pandemic, and also from the musical side, as a musician who, like me, does go around and performs gigs?
From a church standpoint, we were affected in, I want to say, between March and June of last year, but we've been open since then and had regular scheduled services. And secondly, we've been part of our service has been online. We preemptively we've been recording or live streaming our services for the last, I want to say 10 years. The music industry, though, the music part of that has been really tough because venues, restaurants, families, weddings, all that stuff has just been put on hold. And so it's been a little tough to bounce back from that. But we do what we can. And I think things are starting to open up as of late. I just hope that, I know our governor just relaxed a bunch of things. I'm just hoping that this isn't getting us set up to be shut down again after the All-Star game. But that's a whole nother topic, Jimmy.
Yeah, I do think that there's a lot of speculation with the All-Star game coming to Denver, Colorado in July about what the government's policies are right now and what they might be after that game. And I know that it is a tangent, but just real quickly, I would appreciate your thoughts, actually, on the All-Star game leaving Georgia and coming to Colorado. I think we haven't had the chance to talk about it on the show. I know it's a diversion, but just very briefly.
One of the things that really bothers me about it is I'm just so sick and tired of woke culture. The woke supremacists, they can take a common sense bill and politicize it, and then cause Major League Baseball and all these other businesses to just say, hey, you know what? You don't agree with us, so we're going to cancel you. And these companies are so afraid. Shocking to me was what the Major League Baseball's response was, because they have now disenfranchised. If you're supposedly helping millions of African Americans or blacks in Atlanta, and you take the game away, these are people who've already spent money on advertising. People have spent money on beefing up their staff, money on material goods, and now you take a game away and you put it in a city. You take it from a city that's, I want to say 60% black to a city that's 10% black. To me, it sounds like the old okey doke. And when you see the people on the left, they just kind of look at it as, hey, we won. No, you didn't win because you're not taking care of your people. I have friends that are excited about the All-Star game being here because they saw the excitement of it. Probably, 10 years ago when when the Rockies were in the deep in the playoffs and they're actually in the World Series. And that is an excitement, but to disenfranchise a whole city that really needed the economic stimulation from this.
$190 million in economic, or I think billion, might have been 190 billion, but a lot of money in economic benefits to the community.
Yeah. It really doesn't make any sense, but that's why we're on your show, because we're supposed to make sense out of nonsense.
That's
right?
exactly right. And by the way, I will give you full credit for that line. We were sitting together figuring out the lyrics for the theme song, Biff Gore, and you said making sense out of nonsense, which especially fits because we like to talk a lot about the intersection of politics and economics here on this program. And we'll talk a little bit more about the musical side of that theme song when we bring on Rabbi Hausman, because as you know, he is a very good music aficionado himself, Pastor Biff Gore.
Yes.
But that was a lot of fun, by the way, doing that theme song last year. I can't believe it's well over a year ago now.
Yeah. The thing that I think about with this whole situation is in terms of what's going on with the pandemic. I mean, this is a virus that's obviously killing people. A small amount of people, and we need to take it serious. We need to take every illness serious. But I just think that we're being manipulated, and I'm just glad that we have, the mainstream media is pretty much gone. I don't even watch the regular news anymore, but I'm thankful that for guys like you who are, you're kind of like that. You're that little voice that's going to get bigger and bigger, and eventually your audience is going to grow to a point that people are going to come to you as a source of information because you have a truth that people are seeking. You're at least putting out the plain facts. I remember calling you in the middle of the election thinking, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And you really kind of talked me down off of the ledge, as so to speak, because I really was thinking there was going to be I thought there was going to be a real shakeup in Washington. And I know I don't want to change the subject a little bit, but I'm saying this. I appreciate you being a calm voice in the community, in the news community.
Let's talk now about, and I really appreciate that, Biff Gore, Pastor Biff Gore, Highline Community Church in Englewood, Colorado. Let's talk about what we're seeing amidst the pandemic, amidst cancel culture, all these things when it comes to our religious liberty. Jack Phillips, of course, here in Colorado as well. We interviewed him a little while ago, and that story is just absolutely heart-wrenching. Judge Ken Starr has a brand new book, Religious Liberty in Crisis, taking a real macro view while also sharing some micro stories. Pastor Biff Gore, overall, what is your diagnosis of the current state of religious liberty in America today?
We are the frog in the proverbial pot. It's warm right now, but they're getting ready to turn the heat up. It's warm in the sense that, on one hand, I was really impressed with what happened on January 6th. Not the going into the Capitol part, but people actually showing up. People were concerned that they didn't want to get their election stolen. The second piece of that is, I think the church is asleep and we don't see what's happening. And I'm talking, when I say the church, I'm talking about faith communities. There are these attempts to put legislation on the books that would, it sounds like these are equity laws or equity rules or things of equity, but they're not. And what they're going to do is they are systematically going to make what we say in the faith community appear to be hate speech, and that they're protecting the 1% of people who might be, transgender or homosexual, and it's absolutely. I think we're in trouble, and unless we really stand up to the bullying and to the real bullying, as I call it, the church, the faith community is not going to fare well.
Pastor Biff Gore, I think that Jack Phillips is a very instructive story here, to what you're talking about because, and I summed this up a few moments ago, but as he shared, he'll serve anybody. It's not a matter of who that person is. He's going to treat every human being with dignity, respect, and kindness, just as his Lord and Savior Jesus Christ calls him to do. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that he is going to use his, you can see on the screen now, his amazing artistic talents to present a message with which he deeply disagrees because it goes against his religious faith and his religious conscience. This isn't about people not wanting to treat other people with respect because of religious beliefs. It's that they don't want to be forced to set aside their religious beliefs in participating in things with which they disagree on a religious basis or because their conscience stands deeply opposed to it.
Yeah, I stand with Mr. Phillips, and as a matter of fact, I support him. Probably a little too much in my waistline here because every opportunity we
Nathan,
get, we
put
order.
that video back up, please, brother, because I want to excuse everything with Biff Gore and what he's saying about these cakes because they are delicious and amazing. Please go on.
They are absolutely delicious, and there's gluten-free options as well. One of the things that if I could just summarize what the premise of the Constitution and the right to free speech is, that gives me the ability or the opportunity to agree to disagree with you, not to my detriment though. So if I don't agree with you, that just means that we have an opportunity to debate, and you can either bring me over to your side or I can bring you over to my side. But that doesn't give you the right to shut me down and absolutely, completely destroy my livelihood and my business, or destroy the fact that I want to serve God and I want to serve him in a mighty way and be able to say what the Bible says. I thought those things were protected under the Constitution.
Well, if you ask Judge Ken Starr and myself as well, they still are. But the question is, to what extent will you call them woke supremacists? Will the left, will the cancel culture be able to suppress religious belief in these ways? You expressed earlier a concern that they might say what's discussed in the pulpit is hate speech and use that as a premise to go after churches. Please expand on, as a pastor, Biff Gore, your concerns in that regard.
Well, there are some things. There are passages in the Bible that are they're not hard sayings to me, but it talks about what sin is. It talks about things like excessive drinking, excessive eating. Gluttony is a sin. It talks about lying. It talks about sowing seeds of discourse as a sin. But it also is pretty plain and clear about sexual preferences and what is a sin, what is defined as a sin in the Bible. And so people can look at that and say, well, your book is a bigoted book because it clearly says that homosexuality is a sin. It also says that sex outside of marriage is a sin. And but you don't have, you're going to have groups of people who come after the church because of the church's or the Word of God's clear stance on social issues.
Pastor Biff Gore, our guest, and there is some difference in the teachings and so forth. For example, as the Catholic faith would say, being gay is not in itself a sin. It's acting on engaging in a variety of different sexual behaviors and whatnot that can be sinful, as the Bible talks about. But Pastor Biff Gore, the fundamental point is not, does anybody like that, or do they agree with it, or what have you? The fundamental point is religious, faithful, and churches being able to discuss and address these issues in a very candid way and without fear that the government or some other outside institution is going to come in and say, nope, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to talk about that. You're not allowed to say that.
Yeah. I mean, we see that we see how heavy-handed our government has been on the church. I mean, just look at the fact that freedom of religion is It is a tenet, and it is a forefront in our Constitution. And the first thing they shut down was the church, and they left open all the abortuaries and the liquor stores and all of the weed shops, and are punishing churches. Were arresting people, giving them tickets as they drove their cars into the parking lot to participate in worship. I'm even thinking about this. I know this is Canada, but there was a pastor who was jailed recently for having a live worship service. And then this whole, each county having its mask mandates and all that. We had to go to the Supreme Court, and I'm thankful that there are churches who understand the law. There are churches who understand that your emergency powers don't supersede church. They don't supersede what the Word of God says, and they don't supersede what our Constitution allows us to do. How does an emergency power take away the power of the people? This is a document that was written by the people and for the people, and just one fell swoop said, "Oh, we have emergency power, so we can do this." All in the name of power and control.
Pastor Biff Gore, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, live in Englewood, Colorado. And now I am so privileged and pleased to welcome via the telephone here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, my friend in Stoughton, Massachusetts. He is the rabbi at Ahovat Torah congregation, again, in Stoughton, Massachusetts. I am pleased to welcome, you can put the three-way screen on, please, Rabbi Jonathan Hausman. Rabbi, welcome to the show. You're on with Jimmy Sengenberger and Pastor Biff Gore.
Well, thank you so much, Jimmy. Pastor, how are you?
Hey, Rabbi, I'm doing great. So good to hear your voice.
You too, my friend. Once all this craziness is past, I'm planning to come out for a visit.
Oh, awesome. I can't wait to see you and hang out with you.
It will be delightful to have you here. Well, I am so pleased to have you both on. And, I want to step away for just a moment from the serious discussion because, look, we like to have fun here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. And one of the cornerstone bits of fun that we have is with our exclusive original theme song that I was so pleased and privileged to be able to put together with none other than season 6 star of The Voice, Biff Gore. And I want to play for just a moment the music video to give a really good welcome to Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, a little bit of the music video of Biff Gore and I doing that theme song for Jimmy at the Crossroads. And then let's get the rabbi's feedback on that and see what you think, Rabbi, of the song that we created. Let's take a listen.
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
All right. Rabbi Jonathan Hausman Welcome officially to Jimmy at the Crossroads. Tell us your thoughts on the theme song, brother.
It sounds to me like you were listening to a little bit of Magic Dick and Sonny Boy Williamson.
You know, we weren't actually, but that would totally be a great time. That's for darn sure.
Well, you know something? When I get out there to meet up with Pastor and the two of us will meet with you, we'll have to do something in the studio with these great harp players over the years.
You know, that would be a lot of fun.
Hey, I'm down for it. I'm down for it. Who do you start with? You know, do you start with Little Walter? Do you start with somebody else? That's the problem. Who do you start?
That is the challenge. That's for darn sure. Well, I appreciate you joining. I had to squeeze that in there, Pastor Biff Gore. You know, it is always a delight whenever we have the opportunity, Biff, to have a conversation and talk about what's going on when it comes to music as well as the serious issues of the day. Biff, any quick reflection on that theme song or the rabbi's thoughts before we jump back into the serious discourse?
No, I concur. And I think one of the good things about that's come out of us kind of self-isolating and all that good stuff is the fact that we were allowed to be a little bit more creative. I think when you have time to reflect and sit back, you also have time to think and create. And so, you know, we were able to crank this out, man. And I mean, it was a matter of a day. We wrote the song together in one day, and then you put your guy together, and I got my guy together, and we were able to shoot the video. I mean, I thought it was spectacular.
It was a lot of fun, and it really turned out great, and you are such an exceptional talent, Biff, so I'm so grateful for you to join us in putting together this theme song. It was a great treat to be able to partner with you in that. Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, let's jump into our serious topic of the day, which is religious liberty in crisis. We did interviews with Jack Phillips and his attorney, Ryan Bangert, Judge Ken Starr, Pastor Biff Gore, and I have been talking a little bit about what's going on in terms of the current state of religious liberty in America. So I'm going to pass along to you a very broad question, Rabbi, and that is, what is your diagnosis or your sense for where things are at, big picture, when it comes to religious liberty in the country right now?
Well, I'll tell you, I think it's not just religious liberty. I think the whole range of rights that are protected by the Bill of Rights and the Constitution are under assault. I wish I could say it's just religious liberty, but it's freedom of speech, it's freedom of assembly, it's the Second Amendment rights. As a matter of fact, I think you just had some bill that was coming through the state legislature there, dealing with the Second Amendment. It's the Fourth Amendment, unreasonable search and seizures, and I'll tell you, Alan Dershowitz has spoken at length about this with regard to what happened to America's mayor, Rudy Giuliani, over the past few days. You know, and from my vantage point, and I come at this a little bit differently because I do have the law background as well.
Yes.
I have to tell you, what we're seeing here is what relatives of mine who fled the Soviet Union described in terms of government treatment of the citizens in the former Soviet Union. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights are supposed to be a restraint on government, not something that can be willy-nilly manipulated by whatever branch of government. And, you know, I here in Massachusetts, we still, according to the state legislature and the governor, we still can't open up houses of worship fully. We're still under, you know, it's not a strict lockdown, but, you know, we're doing what we can by way of alternative methods. But being able to gather, can you imagine having a funeral? Jewish funerals happen to be communal experiences. And we have funerals limited to 10, 12 people. Not everybody from the family can join in. It's just, I've never seen anything like this in my life. And I'd like to know where. And Anglo-American common law legal doctrine, all right, it says that individual liberties are wonderful, except in in a situation where an emergency has been declared, in which case anything goes and anything can be abrogated.
Again, we're talking with Rabbi Jonathan Hausman in Stoughton, Massachusetts, and Pastor Biff Gore in Englewood, Colorado. Pastor Biff, as you hear what Rabbi Hausman is saying in terms of liberty and the law, that's one of the big reasons why I wanted to have Judge Ken Starr on. Being someone himself of the law, he was a solicitor general. He was a judge on a circuit court of appeals. Of course, he's known for his prosecution of Bill Clinton and what have you. But when we look at the Supreme Court and we look at the law, there's a lot that the Supreme Court has gotten wrong. Make no mistake. But he's pretty optimistic about the current court and its willingness to stand up for religious liberty more and more. I'm wondering, Biff, where you come at that viewpoint. Are you optimistic like Judge Starr, especially with the court that we have thanks to President Donald Trump, or are you more pessimistic? What's your sense?
I'm a little bit more pessimistic in the sense that you look at every session of the court that we've had in the last 50 years, and even the ones that claim to be conservative. I guess I judge things by what was the court like when Roe versus Wade passed? What was the court like? I mean, we use these as talking points and election items that we need to pack the court with, and that may be a bad term, with conservative judges. Democrats come in or liberals come in, and they say we have to pack the court with liberal leaning judges or left leaning judges. I'm just I'm a little bit held reserved because I think we have a few good justices, and then they make decisions that just don't even make any sense to me. It's almost like they are defiers of logic as well. And so it just baffles my mind that something that is clear-cut in the Constitution, clear-cut in the Bill of Rights, can just be overlooked. I almost think that they're looking at European law sometimes in order to make some of the decisions that they make. As far as religious liberties are concerned and freedom of speech, I think they're getting watered down, and I think that our judiciary, I think they're afraid. I think they legislate afraid instead of looking at the Constitution and legislating from is this constitutional or not.
Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, what's your sense, especially with that JD background as a lawyer, of the Supreme Court? And I'm especially thinking, too, about two different areas of religious liberty. One, we have the restrictions on the faithful and on churches and synagogues and so forth, as you were just alluding to in terms of funeral numbers and attendance. That aspect of restraining religious liberty, but then also what we're seeing increasingly with regards to the so-called cancel culture and this attempt to really enforce a woke ideology upon all Americans.
Well, look, it's not just enforcing a cancel culture. What you're talking about really is pulling out the foundations of all of our personal liberties, and such that you get, like in communist China, like you're rated, and the more points you have, the more ability you have to be able to work around society. It's people today are talking past one another, not debating ideas with one another. And I mean that's the way I see it. And Jimmy, it's difficult because what you're talking about is balancing liberty, whether it's liberty, religious liberty, freedom of assembly, right to assembly, freedom of speech. No matter what it is, you talk about this balance of liberty on the one hand and security on the other. And, here we are in this pandemic, and I'm not saying that we should be reckless in our behaviors, but we have not just national, but state governments across the country that have exercised exclusive of woke culture, we have national and state governments across the country that have exercised expansive powers to enact policies in an effort to slow, well, in this case, it's to slow the spread of a virus. Who's to say that, you know, a national emergency won't be declared in some other facet of our national existence, and these expansive powers will be used to enact other policies to limit how we live, how we associate, how we speak, and how we educate others as a society.
You know, Pastor Biff Gore, something is really resonating with me about what Rabbi Hausman is saying, and that is this idea that right now what we could be seeing is the setting of a precedent for the future, and how when other crises come up or situations that they want to amplify in the government, that they now have the precedent for restricting religious liberty in these very overt ways.
I agree. I mean, think about, you know, even in our like I mentioned earlier today, we are frogs in this gigantic pot, and the water is warm, but they're turning it up, and eventually we're going to be caught asleep, and we're not going to have any power or anything to stand on because we gave away all of our rights. And I know that we should, you know, from public safety standpoint, we should be standing on the side of caution for certain things. But when we give people just absolute authority and power, they abuse it absolutely, as Rabbi was just talking about, and that's what's happening. We see it. We're you know, Jimmy, you can attest to this, and so will you, Rabbi. You're a music aficionado. I mean, you probably know more about music than I do.
And me too.
One of my friends who's a drummer makes this statement about being in a train wreck when a gig's not going well. He says the only thing worse than a train wreck is when you're in the middle of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's going on right now. We're in the middle of a train wreck, and unless we stand up to the bullies, Rabbi, you know how you've seen the power grab in Nazi Germany. You saw the power grab with socialism in Italy and all these other places around the world. Probably the latest place is Cuba. That power grab, where a totalitarian regime comes in disguised as we're for the people when they actually are not. And the first thing you attack are the things that really stand up against you. Sure. You saw the quiet revolution in public education. The second revolution is coming in the church. Look at how ridiculously acquiescing some of these churches are. They're not even meeting. I know churches in my community that aren't even open yet.
Yeah. Well, Rabbi, I'd love for you to speak to what Pastor Biff Gore just said, but also he said earlier, Biff did, about his concern that they may soon go into the pulpit and monitor what's being said in the church for hate speech, dovetailing in with cancel culture and wokeness in our daily lives, and going after churches for things and synagogues for things that are said from the pulpit. I welcome your reflections on that as well.
States, but intrusions upon the pulpit are taking place up in Canada. You had a pastor up in, I think it was Ontario, but it might be Alberta, okay, who literally was preaching. Yeah, listen, what was he preaching about? He was preaching about traditional marriage from biblical text, and he was arrested.
That's right.
He was arrested. So, you know, this is already going on. Is it going on here in the United States? Not that I can recall, but it doesn't mean that it's not happening somewhere. Look, all I know is this. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights are meant to be a restraint on government. And the Constitution specifically, if you read some of the documents that were written at the particular time, like the Federalist Papers, they will talk about separation of powers within the government and separate spheres of governing, you know, between local, state, and federal. This system was set up specifically to make legislation cumbersome, to make change some in order to protect individual liberties. And if there's one thing I know from my family's history, and look, I have family from Central Europe, I have family from Eastern Europe, I have family that lived under the czars and communism, I had family that lived in Central Europe and destroyed by the Nazis. If you give up some of your personal liberties in order to have security, in the end, you will have neither security nor personal liberty.
Ben Franklin, yeah.
Yeah,
Amen.
and listen, it's just an axiom of history. You know, and you show me where the ceding of individual liberties, okay, wherever that's occurred, where those individual liberties were
restored.
By the way, restored without the resort to civil war or violence.
Right.
You know, now all this being said, I do have to say we see many examples across the country where individuals and in some cases certain organizations are beginning to push back against what many see as these measures of intrusion, arguing that they are, for the lack of a better phrase, unwarranted violations of basic constitutional rights and personal liberties. You know, and look, there are other people who are arguing, and I know plenty of people around here who say, no, they're justifiable and reasonable emergency powers granted by the government. Really? Yeah. Okay. Me, it's very simple. What does the Constitution say? What does the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, Sixth Amendment say? What about the Eighth Amendment? What about the 10th Amendment, reserving undelegated rights back to the states? Okay, all these things are coming into play. And I don't want to leave the three of us or any of the listeners so depressed at the end of this conversation saying there's nothing we can do. There's plenty you can do. It's just like what's taking place across the country amongst local school districts. You know, it was very easy for parents to say, it was very easy for parents to cede control over education to the public schools. Well, now we have COVID, and it was an eye opener. It was an eye opener for a lot of parents. Okay, so they're saying, wait a minute, I thought my was sending my kid to Samuel Staples Elementary School. I don't know, Englewood High School, whatever it is. All right, to be educated. And it seems to me, from what I'm hearing, okay, they're being indoctrinated. It opened a window for parents to see what was happening in the classroom.
Yes.
And a lot of what we see in terms of the fight against our constitutionally enshrined protected liberties, okay, and listen, these are God-given rights, as Pastor Biff will tell you. These are God-given rights. All the Constitution does is protect those God-given rights. But now parents are seeing this is what's happening in the classroom. And a lot of teachers and a lot of school districts are really chafing at this because now they no longer have carte blanche.
Yes.
You take a look at the statistics of the number of parents who are pulling their kids from public schools, placing their kids in private schools, or getting together with a group of parents for homeschooling now.
Yeah. Well, Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, I think those are very important words, and I do want to, as we spend just a couple minutes left with Pastor Biff Gore before we got to let him go, Pastor, I want to ask you about what your thoughts are in terms of religious liberty in education. I mean, you are a homeschool father, so you have 7 kids, and they're a homeschooled family. And, you know, you were prepared better than most families for this kind of pandemic environment because, of course, you've been homeschooling your kids. That wasn't something that was a brand new occasion. But we do have a lot of these court cases in the past on prayer in schools, even voluntary prayer or after-school prayer or prayer at sporting events, for school teams and what have you. What's your take on that, and where we go from here as a nation in terms of young people being able to exercise their religious beliefs and speak out about their faith without fear of intimidation or coercion or things like that?
Well, I think the reason we are not preemptive people, I think that we have just been taught that, you know, you work your career, you you shop at the same grocery store, you send your kids to the same schools, and you don't make any waves. And people in the faith community have done three things. We checked out from society. And we could change this. We could actually make our world better if we were actively involved in our local school boards, in our local politics. Franklin Graham made a statement a couple weeks ago, and he said, Franklin said that if you ran for office, you might get elected. And I think that is absolutely the case. We need to occupy. God left us here for a reason. He left us here to occupy. And if we don't stand up against the tide of tyranny, it's all on paper right now. We really do have a great chance. But the church, the faith community has to rise up. The entire faith community has to rise up.
And to that point, we have a Christian pastor and a Jewish rabbi and a Catholic layman here on this program right now. And Nathan Matoush, another Catholic layman here. And we're all talking about coming together in this regard, in this very important fight, because it crosses religious barriers, Rabbi. This isn't a Christian thing or a Jewish thing. You know, when I was seeing what was happening in New York City in terms of the mistreatment of Jewish communities there, it was devastating to me, as COVID seemed to be used particularly against them by the government there. And
right. And
go ahead.
The only I just want to jump in here because there's a thought that I have. If it can happen to the Jews, it can happen to anyone. Another axiom of history, period. First the Jews, then it happens to everyone else. And what I find astounding, not just amongst the Jews, but amongst tens of millions of Americans. Look, my youngest brother is an epidemiologist, and we argue about this all the time over the past 13, 14 months. And I say, I'm just astounded how tens of millions of Americans suddenly accepted previously unthinkable, unfathomable restrictions on freedoms as basic as leaving home, gathering for worship, assembling in public, and sometimes assembling in public to worship, running businesses, having elective surgery. It goes all the way down the line, all the way down the line. And listen, I can't speak for Pastor Biff. I can speak for myself. I have to be honest with you. Pandemic or no pandemic, it didn't stop what I had to do as a rabbi, how I'm out there, how I need to serve people. Yeah. Okay? And there was nothing that said that this wasn't urgent. There was nothing that said that this was only temporary. Okay? You know, and it's not the first time we've been faced with a pandemic in this country.
No, it's not, Rabbi. Right. I want to give a last word to Biff Gore, Pastor Biff, before we have to let him go. Please, Pastor.
Yeah, we actually fought a war during a pandemic that killed hundreds of millions of people. And you're absolutely right, Rabbi. I think about, they slaughtered the Jews first. And then the Polish people stood up and they slaughtered them next. And then they went after the disabled. And then they went after the people who were most likely to be resistant. We all have to do our part.
We do. Well, Pastor Biff Gore, I know we got to let you go. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really do appreciate your time as always, my dear friend.
Thank you so much for having me. Rabbi, let's do this. Let's do some blues this year.
All right, Pastor, you got it. I'm coming out.
I'm all for it. Hey, hold on. I got my case right here, Biff. Let me give you a proper center. We should have performed some live music here on this show today, Biff. We'll have to do that some other time.
We will. You see, I always have my axe near me, man. Anyway, God bless y'all. And thank you, Jimmy. Thanks for standing for truth, man. God bless y'all. I'm out.
Thank you. You as well. Pastor Biff Gore, Highline Community Church in Englewood, Colorado, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Well, Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, it looks like it's you and me now for a little bit longer. I appreciate you joining on the show. I do want to ask you to speak to, because this fits in with the religious liberty discussion when you're talking about, for example, New York City and how Jewish communities were particularly facing the brunt of the government's overreach and excess when it comes to trampling upon religious liberty in this country and people's ability to gather for faith services, for funerals, so on and so forth. But that also dovetails in with the rise of anti-Semitism that we have had here in this country. A lot of times it seems under the guise of anti-Israeli or sentiment, or under the guise of anti-Israeli policy. Could you speak to that, the tie-in of religious liberty and trampling upon that, along with what we've been seeing in terms of the rise of anti-Semitism in this country, Rabbi?
Oh, boy. You got 5 hours?
I got some time.
God, listen, all I can tell you is this. I said to a couple of pastor friends of mine, as a matter of fact, in conversation last week, that while this may seem new to them, I grew up with this. You know, I grew up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where, you know, those of us who were Jewish were under physical and spiritual attack constantly. I remember as a kid, people saying all kinds of epithets in public schools, throwing pennies at the Jewish kids, all kinds of things. And the difference now is that public expression has been legitimated. Okay, 20 years ago, you didn't have public expressions of anti-Semitism like you have it now. It's as simple as that. And with, you know, I was asked a few days ago, Rabbi, do you think that the Democratic Party is anti-Semitic at its core? And I said, no, I don't. I said, I don't think it's anti-Semitic at its core. But what I do believe is that they're so good at circling the wagons that you won't find, for example, what happened to Representative Stephen King out of Iowa. You won't find that on the Democratic side. What Rashida Tlaib or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Ilhan Omar says about Israel, and by extension about Jews. So by way of not confronting it, it legitimizes the ability to continue to express it. And you know, it needs to be confronted. It needs to be confronted muscularly. I'll be honest with you. Then again, Jimmy, when am I not honest?
That's exactly right. That's what I was thinking.
Okay. But I'll be honest with you. I take a look at what some of the alphabet soup of Jewish organizations, national Jewish self-defense organizations, how they're responding to this rise in anti-Semitism over the past decade or so, and I find their responses wanting. You know who's published, and that's because for a lot of these organizations, they're only willing to take a look at anti-Semitism as it comes from the right. And I'll be honest with you, it's not that there isn't anti-Semitism from the right, but it's not as ubiquitous as it is from the left. But these organizations are run by and large by people of the left. I'm not saying that being a leftist is bad, but you know, you have to be able to recognize where danger is. And I think that they're missing the mark here. The one organization that seems to me that is really addressing anti-Semitism across the board and its full manifestations, its full efflorescence today, happens to be the Family Research Council. They came out with a statement, today's Monday. So they came out with a 57-page position paper on this last Thursday or Friday. That's absolutely magnificent. And I have to say, kol hakavod, you know, with all due honor, respect to Tony Perkins and the executive vice president of the Family Research Council, Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin. That is Lieutenant General Jerry Blackhawk Down Boykin. Okay, to Chris Gasek and a number of the other people who've been involved with this, none of whom are Jewish. But they take a look at this and they say, if this can happen to Jews, it's a disease for society in its entirety.
No, that is so true.
Not really answering your question, but I am speaking to what I see right now.
Right. Well, and the thing is, though, when we have this rise in anti-Semitism, and then there are certain ways to try and code it, to have it hidden underneath something, say criticism of Israel, or using COVID-19 as a basis, like in New York City. I mean, that is a prime example of what was so wrong with the anti-religious liberty policies that we've seen, is what Mayor Bill de Blasio did in New York City last year. And
He allowed protesters to go out unmasked, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but would now allow prayer in synagogues, the gathering for Jewish weddings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, I don't know why people were surprised about it. It's perfectly keeping within the character if you know about this man's history. But, you know, still, here we are, you know, anti-Semitism is, as it was in a headline in USA Today, not that I read USA Today a lot, but, you know, there was a headline, anti-Semitism is not a punchline. You know, this is America.
Mm-hmm. Well,
you know?
Yeah. Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, when we look at the state of religious liberty in America today, something in terms of practical actions that people can do, I think, is certainly speaking out, speaking up, but that seems so easy to say. What do you think people listening right now or watching right now should do or should keep in mind in terms of ways to stand up for religious liberty against the suppression of expression of religious viewpoints or other forms of expression, and also to stand up against some scourges like what we're seeing in terms of the rise of anti-Semitism?
Well, listen, I'll tell you something. When somebody says religious freedom or religious liberty, you know, there are a few things that come to mind. One is this association part of this, okay? Our ability to go to church, to synagogue, to mosque, whatever it is, to the ashram, okay? You know, people think of freedom of worship, and that's certainly part of it, Jimmy. But, you know, freedom of worship, freedom of religion, I think, is so much more than that. You know, I really think it means, just like in the example of the baker out there, okay? It means that people shouldn't have to go against what their core values happen to be, that people shouldn't have to go against their beliefs in order to conform to culture or to government. And I think that this is really lost on a lot of this. I mean, remember the First Amendment, if I'm quoting it, if I remember it correctly, and mind you, it's been many, many decades since I've been in law school, and I didn't practice law in the era of constitutional liberties. But what does the First Amendment say? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof.
Yes.
That was almost 250 years ago. Okay. And we wouldn't be having this discussion, whether Pastor was part of this discussion up until a few moments ago or moving forward with just the two of us, if this wasn't one of the most pressing issues in American society and American culture today.
Yeah. Well, and something to that point, when you bring up Jack Phillips, who is the baker in Lakewood, Colorado, we had on the show earlier, he's an example of living out his faith in his business. Well, we often heard, for example, former President Barack Obama would say freedom of worship, freedom of worship, freedom of worship, which narrows it down to the churches, which, interestingly enough, they've been able to suppress that given all of the COVID stuff we've been talking about. But broadly speaking, they seem to be acting as though your religion, that's something that you do in church, in your synagogue, in your mosque, right. But when you leave there and you go to your business or you go to your school or what have you, leave that behind and move on. You're not able to incorporate that into your business practices. And the thing, too, about that is when it comes to Jack Phillips, his faith is intrinsic to who he is, and it's not like he is saying to anybody, I'm not going to serve you because you are gay or transgender or any other facet of a descriptor of somebody's life. It's you want me to make a cake with a certain message that goes against my conscience and my religious faith. I cannot do that. But if you want to come to me for a birthday cake or some other kind of celebration, I'm happy to do that. He can't not incorporate that faith into his day-to-day business practices, Rabbi.
Listen, I'm a rabbi. Pastor Biff's a pastor. You're a practicing Catholic, right?
Yes.
You know, how is it that we can't live our faith? It informs who we are. It informs the choices we make. It informs what we buy. It informs the entertainment that we involve ourselves in. You know, it's a tactic of the left, and a successful one where these basic concepts that constitutional concepts we have been redefined by language. You know, freedom of worship, religious freedom is redefined as freedom to worship. But, you know, it's more than that. It deals with core values. It deals with core beliefs. It deals with these kinds of things. It protects people's right to live, and it protects people's right to speak, and it protects people's right to act according to beliefs, and to do so, by the way, to do so peacefully, and to do so publicly if we want. You know, listen, if you want to preach the gospel to me, you know, call a vote. All due respect to you. But you know something? I have the concomitant right to say, you want to know something, Jimmy? This is terrific, but it's not for me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? You know, how is it that you can have religious freedom but tell people that they can't be who they are at work, in class, at the gym, at martial arts, at social activities?
Right.
You
well,
know?
It's as though they believe that, not as though, it's pretty clear that they believe that faith is something you just choose. It's like any political beliefs, which is why they're willing to try and suppress conservative political beliefs, for example, oftentimes. But it is something that you just adopt as a set of beliefs, but that's not intrinsic to who you are. And for so many people in this country, it is intrinsic to who you are. And you can't separate that from other aspects of your identity.
Look, and look, I don't want anybody to listen to this broadcast and say, oh, so religious freedom means I have the right to do whatever I want under the cover of religion. Well, yes. The answer to that is no, and the Supreme Court ruled on that over a century ago. Mm-hmm. Okay, the Supreme Court said that the federal government may limit religious freedom, but only when it comes to a compelling interest to do so in order to protect the common good and to limit someone's ability to harm another person. Okay, so exactly. you have the peyote tests. You know, back how many decades ago was that? You had the polygamy versus monogamy arguments with regard to Nevada and Utah and wound up being accepted into the union and things of that sort. Okay, you know, it's just not a free for all. There must be some compelling interest. There can be some restrictions, but there are not willy-nilly restrictions for whatever the government wants it to be.
Yeah.
Such that I would argue that, you know, put to the test, I think with de Blasio and Cuomo. I mean, he doesn't get a pass on this either. What they did, you know, or Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan.
Yeah.
I don't think that they get a free pass.
Well, and
okay.
Rabbi, I just want to jump in because we got to let you go in a couple minutes. But one thing that Judge Ken Starr pointed out earlier is he talked about ordered liberty, which is the idea that, yeah, you don't have just carte blanche to do whatever you want, because you have to make sure that in pursuing your rights and actually exercising those rights, recognizing and living your life that you are free to think, free to act, and free to choose, you can do that insofar as it doesn't trample upon other people's rights. And the thing that I think gets so muddied here in this discussion of religious liberty is the idea, for example, that Jack Phillips is somehow impinging on somebody else's rights by not baking that cake and decorating it as they would like. That's not the same thing. That's not what we're talking about in terms of impinging on somebody's rights here. And I think there's an important discussion we need to have in a religious context and in other aspects of liberty as to what a right actually is, how it manifests itself in our daily lives, and when my rights come against your rights.
You know, I heard an argument take place in the grocery store. Today's Monday, so it was this past Friday, where a couple of people were arguing about, interestingly enough, Caitlyn Jenner for one, Bruce Jenner for the other. Mm-hmm. Okay, and the person who said Caitlyn Jenner, a she, and the response was, well, but wait a minute, basic biology, no matter what surgery takes place, basic biology is, you know, it's a male. And so what ended up happening is the person who said Caitlyn Jenner is a she accused the other person of discrimination. And I thought about it. I went home and talked to my daughter, who is, you know, slightly on the other side of a lot of these things than I am. And I was talking to my kid, and I said, you know, let me ask you something. As we were discussing, I said, should a florist or a photographer or a baker, since Jack Phillips was just on, or a baker, be forced to provide their services for same-sex weddings and celebrations that violate their religious beliefs? And of course, the response was, well, nobody should be allowed to discriminate. I said, well, let's flip the question then. Should someone who is a lesbian or a homosexual, let's say graphic designer or a printer, be forced to create a pamphlet or a flyer for a religious group's rally that opposes same-sex marriage? You know, and Jacqueline said no. I said, then what's the difference? If it shouldn't be for one, it shouldn't be for the other side as well. You know, and that doesn't mean that there's a free-for-all. Okay, but it does mean recognizing that there are plenty of options within society. Okay, and just because Jack Phillips may have his religious beliefs does not mean he's denying a service because of who somebody is.
Mm-hmm. Right. That was an important distinction that we got to in our interview with Jack. And actually, it goes back a few years, and I cited this in my conversation with him. We had a live remote for my radio station, a 710 KNUS, at Masterpiece Cakeshop, and a gay man named Mike Jones came and sat down, and we did an interview, and he said, I come here all the time. In fact, Mike testified back in March at Jack Phillips' most recent trial regarding the gender transition cake that he said he didn't want to bake and design. This Mike Jones said, look, I come here all the time. I love the people here. Jack treats me with the utmost respect. I just know that if I want a cake with a certain message that he disagrees with, he's not going to bake that, but that has nothing to do with who I am, and he will still serve me as a human being and treat me with respect and with dignity and with kindness. Right.
So then one has to argue, and I'm sure Judge Starr, I mean, he knows more about this than I do. I'm a peon compared to him when it comes to these things. But, you know, I take a look at the what was it, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, and I take a look at what they did, and I say, okay, that's fine. What is the compelling interest for the government of state of Colorado to interfere? Now, that's a hell of a lot different than the government coming in to fight Jim Crow laws, for example, that mandated, the laws themselves mandated segregation based on racial supremacy. There's a big difference here, a huge difference. But, you know, we're in an era, Jimmy, where people don't want to listen to these kinds of arguments and involve themselves in the discussion. And what they hear is, they'll hear a Jack Phillips, and they'll just say, you're a bigot. Really?
Won't have
that's your response?
Not that's even having that kind of discourse. And, you know, see, here's the thing, too, and I want to wrap up with this point, Rabbi, is that we need to have these kinds of discussions so that you can actually suss out the ideas and find the flawed bad ones. If you are trying to say that anything and everything is bigoted, if it, you know, even touches on this little line, you're not going to actually dismiss and get rid of the true bigotry that is in existence. If everything is bigoted, then nothing is bigoted. Instead, you need to actually have those conversations so that people who are genuinely actually embracing truly bigoted ideas can learn that, yes, those are actually bigoted, having a discussion as to why it's so wrong, and hopefully change their ways and start having that that conversation within their own hearts and with their own God about where they are coming at things from. And if you can't have those discussions, then you can't actually get at the root of the problem.
Right, and you won't have an ordered, free society, as Judge Starr would say.
Yes.
Okay? That's why the answer is always very important. Does religious freedom mean religious people get special rights? And I would submit that Jack Phillips said, no, I'm not asking for any special rights. When did I ever ask for a special right?
Right.
I'm not asking for that at all. I'm just asking, or I'm just arguing, what is government's compelling interest when there are 10 other bakeries within a mile radius of my bakery who be happy to serve these people, and I'm happy to refer you to them.
Yeah, and Rabbi, one other thing that he said is that the harassment from the lawyer who wanted a gender transition cake had been making all sorts of requests for years, that there was a clear understanding that Jack Phillips would never have baked a cake that had anything to do with a marijuana joint or something else. And that's what this same individual kept calling about. So I want to ask you one final big picture question, because we've got to run here. And I know you and I could you said you got 5 hours earlier. We don't, but I know we could go at this for 5 hours, Rabbi. But where do you think we go from here in terms of religious liberty? And what do we need to keep in mind as we fight back and make sure that we protect our constitutional rights that have been endowed by our Creator?
First, the paramount, Jimmy, paramount. I think people need to understand that religious freedom, as I mentioned, the question, as we were just talking a minute ago, religious freedom does not mean that religious people get special rights. Religious freedom does mean the following: religious freedom prevents the cultural majority from using the power of the state to impose their belief on others. And I really think that people have to, it's something that is lost in the discussion. It's lost in this, the muddle that we see generally within the media itself, okay? To understand that religious freedom prevents the cultural majority from using the power of the state to impose their beliefs on others, that necessarily means, all right, the next step of this means that this is a protection for everyone, religious and non-religious alike, from the government becoming so powerful that it can tell you what to do, how to act, what to think, what to eat, what to drink, all the way down the line.
They are the all-knowing, all-powerful government in their mind.
Right, which is why the First Amendment starts with religious liberty and then gets to the others, because the founders, I mean, listen, and this was included in the Federalist Papers, okay? The founders of the constitutional order knew that conscience has been considered, they considered conscience to be the individual's most sacred right, sacred right. And a government that intrudes on your conscience will not hesitate to intrude on all of our other freedoms as well.
Rabbi,
I just think it's axiomatic.
Yeah, oh, definitely. Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, I'm sure we will talk again about this topic sooner than later. My friend, thank you so much for joining us on Jimmy at the Crossroads today. Really appreciate it, and a real treat having you and Biff Gore on together again.
And if I may, Jimmy, I want to apologize. I had funerals today, responsibilities in the congregation, so I do apologize for being late.
Oh, please, by all means. I appreciate you taking the time after a funeral to come and join us on this important discussion. It really means a lot.
Thank you. It means a lot to me, too.
Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, God bless you, and take care, my friend.
You too.
Once again, Rabbi Jonathan Hausman of Ahavat Torah congregation in Stoughton, Massachusetts, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Now I am pleased because I want to get the feedback from Nathan Matoush, producer extraordinaire, working the Matouche magic today here, as always, on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I want to get your feedback on the conversations that we've had with Pastor Biff Gore, with Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, with Judge Ken Starr, with Jack Phillips, and attorney Ryan Bangert. And my question from the beginning, are you more optimistic or pessimistic based on these various discussions, Nathan? But your overall reactions first, my friend.
Well, first off, Jimmy, I want to thank all these people that came on the show and expressed their views on religious freedom, and it was fascinating conversation, with Ken Starr and Jack Phillips and Rabbi Hausman and Pastor Biff Gore. These are all just great people that are expressing their opinion, and that's what we need to do. I think to figure out this problem is we need to have more people like us stand up and express our opinion, because really, I think this whole problem with religious freedom and the government taking over, I think it starts with us. It's happening because people are bowing down to it. People are not standing up, and if people aren't standing up, then the government can do really whatever they want.
So, optimistic, pessimistic. Do you think that there's hope for the future, or are we done and gone pretty much right now, Nathan Matouche?
It's a combination of both. This Constitution was made by brilliant men. Our founding fathers made this Constitution to promote religious freedom, and I think something like that, it's going to be tough to bring down. It's tough to bring down the light of the right.
Well, in this case, even beyond just the light of the right, just the idea of individual liberty. Although right now, those on the right are the greatest advocates for it. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think so too. But there's also, pessimistic side to me as well. With all the control that the government has, and it's not just in religion. Really, it's this cancel culture is swinging everywhere. It's even getting involved in the sports world, as we talked about. The All-Star game, and that being moved to Denver, Colorado. And things like that. This is a worldwide problem, and to me, it's kind of like a pendulum. How far, is cancel culture going to go, and how far
will it swing back?
Yeah, will it swing back? I think it has a lot to do with just kind of sitting back and seeing what happens. But really, at the end of the day, I think this starts with us.
It does, and we, like I was saying with the rabbi, we have to have these conversations, because you can't root out true evil and true bigotry and true hate unless you're actually willing to say we're going to identify it when it's really happening, as opposed to saying blanketly we're going to classify anything that fits this mold underneath this rubric or this banner, because you can't get anywhere, Nathan, if you're doing that.
Yeah, exactly. And it starts with us. And what's baffling me is, you and I are both Catholic. And, the COVID restrictions and everything like that, there were a lot of churches closed down for a bit. And it was hard to go to church, during that too, because you had to sign up. And, some churches, you had to wear a mask and social distance. And really, there was only one church, I think, that literally said, heck with all the rules, all the masks and everything. That was Our Lady of Mount Carmel down in Littleton. But these other churches, they're, I feel like they're kind of being threatened, kind of in a way, like, hey, you got to close down or we're shutting down your church. Maybe it's that, but also, like, you look at the Vatican and stuff like that, and they're not really doing anything. They're just kind of letting the government just, push them around and tell them what to do. And I think that's where I go on the pessimistic side, is when you look at the Vatican, and I love Pope Francis. I pray for him every day, and things like that. But there's just something going on. There's something going on where I see, churches just, bowing to the government, bowing to all the mandates and things like that. And to a certain point, I understand, like, early on in the pandemic and stuff like that, but it's a mystery to me.
There has been a lot of capitulation among so many faith communities where it makes you scratch your head and say, why aren't you standing up more for your rights in this case, that are guaranteed or protected under the U.S. Constitution in the United States of America, but anywhere around the globe, is why are you not willing to stand up for your natural rights as human beings when it comes to faith or speech or press or what have you, when you're allowing those things to be taken away by government for a particular crisis situation? Now, sometimes, like you said, maybe in the beginning there's some merit to some of these restrictions, but it has just gone on for far too long and to such an extreme extent, which is exactly why I really wanted to have this discussion today, Nathan, with all of our guests and delving in depth. This is the longest show that we have done probably ever, if not at least since the fall of or summer of last year when we did our special report on what happened downtown Denver.
Yeah.
But bottom line is we have a lot of discourse that we need to have on this and engage with people with whom we disagree. Now, we've all been on the same page today, but it is important to have discussions with people with whom we disagree as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think persuade and stand up and have more of these conversations is the way to go. But I think to answer your question, I don't think I really answered it fully because there's so much going on. I think I'm, half and half. I'm kind of on the fence. You kind of got to see what happens, I think, in the government. We had a previous administration that stood up to stuff like this. So if we can get someone like that coming back in the next 4 years or, the midterms, if we could get more people standing up like that, I think we'll be fine. But cancel culture it's way too far up, up on the pendulum, up on the scale.
Nathan Matoush, I think that's well said, my friend. Thank you so much for working the Matoush magic once again today. What a great show.
Oh, thank you. Great show. It's always a pleasure, man.
Absolutely. Once again, Nathan Matoush, producer extraordinaire, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads into the discussion here on the program. I want to thank Jack Phillips and Alliance Defending Freedom attorney Ryan Bangert. They're doing great work for people like Jack Phillips who are being persecuted for their faith at ADF right now. I also want to thank Judge Ken Starr, my dear friend. He is just absolutely phenomenal, and I really appreciate him taking the time to join us as well on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Dear friends, Rabbi Jonathan Hausman and Pastor Biff Gore as well. Their insights, their thoughts, their passions, certainly very welcome here on this program anytime, and I appreciate them being along for the ride. And most especially, as we wrap it up, that is it for us today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I want to thank you for watching, subscribing, and sharing our content. I didn't think of it earlier in the show, but please share this. Like this video, go ahead and share it, and comment below what your thoughts are on this important discussion of religious liberty. Are you optimistic or pessimistic? What do you think? My thanks as well to our partners at the Washington Examiner here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. That is it for us today. We'll be back next week with more engaging, intelligent talk, saying style. In the meantime, God bless America.
Talking politics, great for generations. Oh, what mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of no sense. Yeah.